Welcome.
Welcome to the Brooklyn podcast. My name is Danny, and today we have a very, very special guest, the legendary creator of Football Manager, Kevin Toms. How are you today?
I'm good. Good evening.
As you can see, this was really artificial and frozen, and it doesn't feel like one of our usual conversations, but yeah, it's a big thing. It's a big thing for us to have you on our podcast. Uh, yeah, and thank you so much for doing this. It's really amazing. A great way to
You're
cap
welcome.
off the year. So
You're
yeah.
welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah. So for the people watching us that are not familiar with you or your work, your game series, could you tell a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, I'm Kevin Toms, and I'm kind of well known for being one of the early game developers that had a successful game right in the early stages of the games industry in the early 80s. In fact, I created the first Football Manager game, which became the founder of the genre of Football Manager games, and is still remembered today, particularly because it was very, very popular and successful, and because it plays so well. And that's what keeps the interest today.
And how did you get the idea of making a football simulation game? I mean, were there other people already at that time doing similar games around,
No. There was nothing like it, because at that time, we were working with things like the ZX81, the Sinclair ZX81, which came with 1K of memory as standard.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't, you couldn't do much with that. And so what people were doing you only could work with the graphics that were in it, like block graphics. You couldn't design sprites or anything like that. So what people were doing was trying to, generally, most people were mimicking arcade games as well as they could within the limited memory that it had. But myself, I came from a different direction. I was already a computer programmer, so I didn't learn to program on home computers like some of the other people were doing at the time. I was a professional programmer writing business software. And I got my hands originally on a Video Genie, which was a TRS-80 clone. And it was on that I wrote the original Football Manager. And the reason I wrote it was because I've been playing around with creating a football management game for years, and as a board game. And then I got my hands on computers, and then I got inspired then and thought, whoa, all the problems I've had with making this kind of board game work, I can solve with the computer. And I was able to do that, and completed the very first sellable version was on the Video Genie, which was a TRS-80 clone produced in Korea, I think. And then I adapted it for the ZX81 a couple of months before I launched it in January 1982, which was a really good move, because the sales on the ZX81 were, I think, 100 times what they were on the TRS-80 Video Genie. So if I hadn't made that move, I don't think I'd have got it off the ground.
Right. But the real kick to the sales and to the popularity, would you say it was with the advent of the ZX Spectrum and the ports to Commodore?
The Spectrum in particular moved it to another level, because I was based in the UK, and things like even the Commodore 64 or the other Commodore devices earlier than that, they were really expensive. The ones that were built for the American market, they were really expensive in the UK. But what happened with Sinclair and his computers, the ZX81 was about £100, which was a completely different price point. I think it was about a quarter of what the American computers were. So it opened up having a home computer, and playing games to a vast new market of people who could now afford it. And the Spectrum, so the ZX81 built the ground of it, really. And that went on for several months. I think it was about 9 months before the Spectrum was released. So it was towards the end of the year, if I remember rightly. And but that had color graphics, and therefore it was much more like a games machine, a very simplified games machine. And in fact, I don't think Sinclair intended it to be a games machine, but it was. And all of us that had been programming the ZX81 used the same things that we'd learned and adapted them to the Spectrum. And that's what I did. And that opened up a whole new market. And also around that time, because when I started, it was all by mail order. There was, it's hard to believe, but there were no game stores, no way of selling except by post to people. It's a hobbyist market, like an obscure hobbyist market, but it transitioned during that first year. And first there were independent retailers, who realized there was a market. And then by the time the Spectrum was around, there were the main high street chain stores started to stock computer games, and then they contacted me. And so everything moved from mail order to retail, and that was a huge increase in sales.
Yeah. And did you ever anticipate that level of success?
No, not really. I mean, I think the thing that I did that was driving what I was doing was I thought I had a really good game. And, I wrote it really to entertain myself, but to let other people play it as well. And I quickly realized, this, I think, is something that people will want. And I could tell by the way that once I put someone and sat them and said, explained the basics of the game and they started playing, how they reacted. And they stayed there. I couldn't get them out of the chair. And I realized I had created something that had an addictive quality. And, it was that entertaining and they just wanted to keep playing. And in fact, so much so that when I was thinking of naming the company, that was what inspired me to call the company that I created to publish the game Addictive Games, because it was addictive. I can remember connecting the two together.
Yeah, still is. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Apparently, yeah.
And you just mentioned having to order through mail and things like that. What were some of the lessons that you learned from making your first game in terms of developing the game, logistics, promotional material, the mug?
Well, yeah, that's later. This is kind of hard to believe, but because everything is so enormous now. I mean, it's the bigger industry, and computer games is a bigger industry than the movie industry in terms of sales worldwide. But at that time, it was an obscure industry, and I started making the games. Piracy didn't exist. I mean, it's just like nobody even thought of that, and so I was making the games myself. And printed the covers, got them printed, designed the covers. They were only simple covers, and then just made everything myself and posted them. And but certain things I learned early on, I suppose, was that I kind of observed advertising a bit and seen how people advertise. I was only using little quarter-page adverts in the magazine, but I realized I had to put across the selling point of the game. Actually, it's just come back to my mind that I think I put the words "beware that this game is addictive," which was a warning, which was a very good one. And I listed the features of the game. But I remember one thing I did was I put in. It was very difficult to know where to advertise. I mean, the first magazine was pretty straightforward, but after that, to know. So it was mail order. So I put department codes in each advert, so I could tell which magazine's adverts were actually working, because I would get the orders directly. It was simple compared to retail, where you don't know which part of your advertising is triggering the sales. It's much more tricky then. Right. But mail order was easy. But yeah, the transition was quite hard to keep transitioning. Had to find manufacturers when it got bigger, and had to produce full color inlays for WH Smith and things like that. So it got bigger and more challenging. It was quite, the transition was quite tough. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine, man. Just, your first game, trying to deal with all those aspects must be really challenging, especially as it grows.
There was one thing that was really nice earlier on. I just thought of, actually. It was only a couple of months after I launched it, I think, that although, as I say, with the context, we were mail order and selling only by mail order, but a guy came up with a bright idea of the ZX Micro Fair, which subsequently ran every 3 or 4 months. And he hired a hall in London and basically rented out some trestle tables and like a market, and you could come down and sell your product direct. Well, for the people who owned, at the time, it was a ZX81, they had nowhere they could go to see the games and see the suppliers. It was all mail order. So this was enormously popular very, very quickly. And it was also really good for me because I was actually talking to customers who bought the product, and because there was no internet, so it was only letters through the post. But this was actually meeting them. This is very, 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 very good.
Yeah, and, I think it is hard to imagine for people my generation.
That's right.
Like, how do you even deal with all that and process and get it to people's hands?
Yeah. There were no companies. You couldn't. People sometimes said to me, "How did you decide? Why did you publish it yourself? Why didn't you get another publisher to do it, or something like that?" Well, there wasn't any publishers. There was no one else to do it, so we were all doing it ourselves.
Wasn't around back then.
Nobody.
Yeah.
It was us. We did it ourselves. So yeah, it's like market traders. We were, just going down to the local market and selling at the ZX Micro Fair.
That's right. The cassettes. Yeah. So after this first game, you went on to create 2 other entries in the series under the Addictive Games label, which were Football Manager 2 in 1988 and Football Manager World Cup Edition in 1990. And both of which were well received by critics and players alike. What were some of the struggles you faced with the sequels, producing the sequels, developing and selling, that you did not encounter when you were making the first game,
Well, taking them separately, Football Manager 2, I think the main thing that, if I was to look back at it and say what created a struggle or I could have done differently, I think the main problem was I was trying to do something very different again. It's sort of almost like inventing the game again in a different way. And so there was like nothing I could reuse. Some of the things I tried to do, I probably would have done differently if I did it again. Although it worked out okay. So it was hard. The other thing that was difficult was when I wrote the original Football Manager, I was just writing it myself. So everything I just did, the whole lot.
You had total control over every aspect.
And there was no one else to kind of try and explain anything to. And one of the things about creating a game from scratch is there's no specification. You make it up yourself as you go. And it can be hard to explain to other people. And I had because the other part of it was that this had to be, Football Manager 2 had to be released on, I think it was 7 platforms. So instead of creating just one, I had to get all of them. So I used a cross-development system to facilitate that. But I couldn't do, or it was too much to do all of the sprite stuff on every machine. So the way I did it was I actually created a kind of virtual machine, but it was before really people talked about that. So I abstracted out a lot of the hardware, and then my core code runs on every device, on every platform. And then I just, push and say, put this player here, put this player there. And of course, all the strategy stuff, like put the text here and do this, react this way and this sort of thing. That was really quite hard to do. Also, because I had to communicate to a team of about 6 developers all around the country in the UK, all working at night. They all became vampires, basically. Because that's a whole other story, how they all ended up working at night. But I was working during the day. So we did some tricky stuff. But I used to send stuff through using a bulletin board system to them, and then they'd work overnight, and then I pick it up the next day and integrate it, and it went like that. So it was quite hard to do logistically. And also I did it successfully, but I actually wrote it in Forth as well, another new language. And I did that because I wanted to find so that I could write the core code that runs on everything, I wanted to find a language that would run on 8-bit and 16-bit processors, which was hard to do. And C hadn't really taken off at that time. So it was Forth, which is a strange language.
Yes, I never heard of
Polish. It's it's never become really successful. But I mean, I've used a lot of different programming languages in my time, but and it uses reverse Polish notation, which is enough to put most people off. That was like the selling point that I think killed it, actually. As soon as you tell people that, they think, God, that sounds terrible. Basically, it's stack-based. But yeah, it's a whole other thing. But it worked. I got it all working. And, as you said, it was a successful game. It was #1 for about 3 months, I think. 4 months, something like that. So despite all the battles, but it was exhausting, quite draining to put that together. Not as much fun as previous work was at all.
Yeah, because also you had spent like 4 or 5 years porting the first one to multiple platforms. And now you have very little time to deliver it to.
Yes, but also in that gap, in that time, I also wrote Software Star and President as well, and was running the company. So it was quite a lot. Writing Software Star and President, were difficult to do. It was a difficult problem to do both things. Run a growing business and be a games developer as well. But I did at that time. Crazy.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine at that time.
Yeah.
And you had already planned the development of Football Manager 3, but you were not actually involved in the game's development after falling out with Prism. Can you briefly describe what led to that breakup, how that affected the game's development, and what would you have done differently, or what features had you planned to incorporate on the game that never made it to the finished product?
Oh, I can answer that very easily. For the first part of your question was wrong. I was not planning Football Manager 3. There was no plan. I had no idea. I was overseas when Football Manager 3 was created and published, and I had no idea it was being done.
Oh, so
I knew nothing about it.
They were doing it without your knowledge, without
my knowledge or involvement. And it's funny, it didn't do too well, actually. So it's not a design from me, not created by me, not even initiated by me. So Football Manager 3 is literally nothing to do with me at all.
Okay, that explains why. I saw a screenshot of Football Manager 2 and another one of Football Manager 3, and I was like, this has nothing to do. One game does not have anything to do with the other. Like the third one was looked very, very below. It looked like
it had nothing at all to do with it, and it.
Yeah, they just stuck the name Football Manager, and
they tried to use the name without using my involvement. Yeah, that's right.
Well, if he doesn't have the mug on the cover on the cassette
and the touch,
inlay,
the game's design touch, it didn't have it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And well, now see, I need to get my facts straight now after this.
No, that's perfectly all right. A lot of you're thinking that is not surprising. I've been asked many times about Football Manager 3, and I've always had to repeat saying I had nothing to do with it. It's nothing to do with me. Oh, and most people don't know that, so they just assume that it must have been, but no.
Right? Yeah, Football Manager.
Yeah.
And so you did not develop another game until 2003. Is that correct?
That could be true. Yeah, I did a lot of.
Another Football Manager game. Specifically.
Yeah, I did a lot of other things. But I think that's quite right. I think I did a lot of software because I was a business software. I was kind of contracting in business software a lot and developing business software, a lot of different things. But that's right. Yeah, I didn't touch another game until then.
And in that 13-year hiatus, you had a lot of other franchises, football management franchises coming up, like Championship Manager and Premier Manager. Do you think you could have somehow competed with them if you had release the game in that hiatus?
Yeah, I would feel confident. Obviously, it would help to have the right kind of resourcing, backup behind, in terms of development at that time and marketing as well. But yeah, of course. I mean, I could have, yeah, if I had not been doing other things and traveling. I traveled a lot, so that I was working in different countries and things like that. So.
Speaking of Championship Manager, I've read that the game developer Sports Interactive, they renamed their series Football Manager after losing the Championship Manager naming rights to the publisher, Eidos Interactive. Can you explain how they were able to get your game series' naming rights, and if there is any connection whatsoever between the original Football Manager games and the Sports Interactive ones?
Okay, well, actually, you kind of, when you were talking about Football Manager 3, you kind of shaped it there, because to make Football Manager 3 without me being there, they obviously had the name. And that was part of the severance of my relationship with Prism. They kept the name. And so that meant that actually when Sports Interactive were looking to purchase the name, they actually purchased it from them. I had no involvement. And that's another question I get asked from time to time. How much money did you get for that? It's it's a little round zero. So yeah, I got nothing for that. So no, I wasn't involved in that at all. So that the reason they could get through that was because someone else owned it. If I had my time again, it would all be different. But that's what everybody can say. So yeah.
And so there's no other connection between the Championship Manager games and your games. It's a totally different product, and they just kind of
nothing at all.
Yeah,
they've got a different path on design that I would, it's obviously people like it, but it's not the kind of way I would go. So yeah, and there's no connection at all. No, nothing. That's their own. So
right, yeah. Crazy how it goes on. Yeah. In 2016, you fully released Football Star Manager, which is an adaptation of your original game to mobile devices that has brought back many fans of the original series and allowed them to once again experience that classic addictive fun of the first Football Manager. Did you expect such a warm reaction from old fans?
No, I mean, it's interesting. The way it came about. I mean, one of the things that probably makes a little bit of context is that when I was doing the original game and selling it and everything like that, there was no internet. So I didn't. I knew the game was selling, but I didn't normally come in contact with people who were playing it. What happened in about 2015 was I'd been a mobile developer for a while, and I was thinking about it, and I just thought, why don't I do a refresh of my original game on mobiles? I could do that. I've got the skills. I know how the game works and why it works, and maybe people would like it. So I just posted online and suggested the idea and to the people who were following me at the time, and I got a very positive reaction. Yeah, please do that. And so then I embarked on it, and it was a really good development, because I found it a very positive, enjoyable experience all the way. And I almost would think that that if it feels that way, you'll probably produce something good. And it's got the playability, the gameplay, and the long-term enjoyment that the original game had. But it's been renewed for mobile, so it uses the touch screens, and the graphics are modernized a bit, but yeah, and some other additional things I've added as well. So what it does is it allows people who like them or love the original game to play again on their mobile without having to worry about getting an old version on an emulator and things like that, and with a user interface that suits mobile. It did its job really well, and people love it. They play hundreds of seasons, and so yeah, it was a good thing to do.
Yeah,
and I actually,
absolutely.
adapted it to also Mac, Windows, and the Kindle Fire as well. But that's quite enough 5 platforms to support.
Mm-hmm. I bet. Yeah. If your experience porting to different platforms, the first one was
Always a problem. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You mentioned Software Star and the president.
Yeah.
Do you feel compelled to bring back these games as well, or to make new games that are not football management games?
The answer to that is yes, when I get time. But the other thing is that at the moment I am more enthralled by the idea of taking the football management genre, my style of game, but modernizing it. I mean, the Football Style Manager was a renewal of an original game. And when I did that, after a while, people playing it started suggesting new features. And I thought about it and I started adding. And then I realized, hang on, I'm going to change the game here. I'm going to make it into something different, which it was really it was like a historic renewal,
Mm-hmm.
So I started talking to people and saying, do you really want me to do that? And majority of people said, no, because this is like what we used to play when we were 14 and things like that. So don't change it too much. So I said, okay, well, what I'll do then is I want to create something new. I've got plenty of ideas. I want to evolve this game, but still keep the simplicity, the ease of use, the playability that are strong without clutter, which is what I like to do. So I said, I'll do a new one. And so that's what I'm doing. And it's progressing along. So when you talk about Software Star, which is where the star came from for Football Star Manager, actually, by the way.
Nice.
Software Star and President, yeah, they are games that I could do. Software Star was a good game too, but I've still got a lot to do on the football at the moment. I don't feel limited by it, and I think it's quite in my mind. There's quite a plan ahead. I could be occupied for quite a while with that before I would free up time. So, although people do ask me for Software Star, especially, yeah.
It just goes to show that you're definitely one of the most influential game developers in history. I mean, besides Software Star and President, you pioneered an entire genre of sports simulation games, and getting that to a tremendous mainstream success. That's at that time that's really something else. And once again, I'm really thankful that you're on our podcast. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Thank you.
What are some tips you have for young game developers who want to carve their own name in the video game industry?
Yeah, that's a really challenging one because I came into it at a different time, and there's now a real career pathway for people. I think the only thing that I would think would be a good tip is it depends on what you want to do, of course, because there's a lot of different ways of working in the games industry. But if you want to create your own stuff, the chances are you won't get a lot of opportunity for quite a long time. So it's a good idea to have, if you're working on a mainstream development, to be doing your own stuff in your spare time, your own app, your own game. That's a good way to learn the way it's all put together. Obviously, that's extra time if you're doing that in your own time and you're working as well during the day. But yeah, it's easy. A lot of the main development follows. They're like franchises; they repeat. But innovation is always interesting, and I think that happens more from the solo developer who's not constrained by budgets and required sales. They're just following what they think is good.
And deadlines,
that's the great advantage of indies. But even indies have to survive, so there's pressure on them too. But if you've got a day job, it's not so bad.
Yeah. We are approaching the 40 years mark on the Football Manager series, and you are currently developing a new installment, aptly titled football new manager.
That's correct.
Did you think that 40 years ago you would still be developing Football Manager games all these decades later?
No, that's very. I should say yes to that, shouldn't I? Yes. Well, I was planning it. No, it's it's quite remarkable, and I really can't recognize the amount of time. It just doesn't seem like it to me. But it's been a busy time, not a quiet time, and I'm very happy to be doing it. It's like feels like a natural thing to do. I got pulled back to it step by step by creating Football Star Manager and thinking, oh, I can still do this. I should do more of this, and then gradually more and more getting involved in it, and now I feel it's just something I'm going to do. The Football New Manager is now at alpha. I've got more than 100 people testing it, and that will continue. I've got new parts that I've created that haven't been added yet that I hope to launch in the next few days, yeah, it'll just continue to grow. I've got plenty of plans for it, and I think I have a niche too, which is that there's a certain style of design that I do, which really is personal. It's my own, and in terms of playability and ease of play, and it seems simple, but it's actually subtle how intricate it is, and so I think there's plenty of scope, kind of artistically as well, to do what I want to do. So plans are way ahead of the time to implement at the moment, but I'll do it step by step.
Right.
But just picking up what you said, it is coming up to 40 years. So that game is which I expect the 1.0 of that game is in alpha at the moment, but the 0.2 it is at the moment. But the 1.0 of that game will be launched in 2022. We're not far from that now. And that will be partly marking that it's 40 years since the original, and a new game.
No
a new
pressure.
Football Manager game. No pressure.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to happen. I don't know how long into 2022 it is. It get to the 1.0. Can't tell you precisely, but it will be probably in the first couple of months, I think.
Well, I certainly look forward to it. Even though I didn't grow up a Football Manager game series fan myself, I've heard of Football Manager for a long time now. But I remember when I was in college, hearing about you while I was doing my degree for gaming and animation, video game production, and 3D animation. And we were studying some of the developers throughout the history of video games. And lo and behold, like the one football game of like in the between the 60s and 90s that showed up on that list, it's Football Manager by Kevin Tom. So it's yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, amazing.
And it's just once again unthinkable to be able to have this conversation with you. And for my last question, where can people follow you and stay up to date with the progress on the new game?
I think the two easiest places are probably on Twitter at Kevin Toms, and the other one is Facebook, where I'm Kevin Toms Games on Facebook. So facebook.com/Kevin Toms Games. And probably the final one, if you look for footballstarmanager.com, that website is there, and that's got connection to all my games. footballstarmanager.com/games lists my games. So, easy ways to stay in touch.
Kevin, thank you so much for being in our episodes. It's been a tremendous honor. I wish you all the best with the new game, which I will be following really up close, because I'm working with you on some of the things for it. So
it's true. Yes.
Yeah, and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope 2022 is not 2022, as so many people have been saying, like a
Yeah,
playback of 2020.
Yeah, I'm sure it won't be. I'm sure it won't be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to wish everybody who is listening then a happy Christmas to them and a good New Year, which is not
Thank
far
you.
off.
Thank you. In name of all our listeners, thank you so much. Guys, don't forget to follow at Broklahomies Podcast. I know the name is tough, but you guys can find it pretty easily. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to our platforms. This has been a terrific episode, Kevin. Thank you so much, and happy holidays to everyone that's listening us around the world. And I'll see you guys on the next time.